Thank you, Dan. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar. Okay, I take this opportunity to ask everybody to shut down their microphone. Thank you very much. I will do a short presentation of PACE, as this webinar is organized under the partnership PACE. It is a partnership under the umbrella of the Basel Convention, and the Basel Convention started addressing the issue of e-waste. Sorry, my presentation hasn't started. In 2002, and then in 2006, the Basel Convention got the mandate to start for innovative solutions to address this kind of issues. So they started with a first partnership, which was called the Mobile Phone Partnership Initiative, MPPI, and which is now closed. And then a second partnership started with PACE, which is the Partnership for Action on Computing Equipment, and which was launched in 2008. So PACE is a multi-stakeholder forum for manufacturers and recyclers, for international organizations, academia, NGOs, and governments. There is currently around 100 members, and we can divide these members into the following categories: 25 parties and signatories to the Basel Convention, 11 Basel Convention regional centers, 9 research and academic institutions and UN bodies, and around 15 NGOs, industry and industry associations. Here you can find a picture of several PACE members. You can see the title is a PACE working group. The working group is the decision body of PACE, and they usually meet once a year. The mission of PACE is to increase the environmentally sound management of used and end-of-life computing equipment, taking into account social responsibility, sustainable development, and promoting information sharing on life cycle thinking. And the scope is the personal computers and associated displays, printers, and peripherals. The working principles under PACE are first to promote the dialogue amongst governments, industry, NGO, and academia, an initiative that could be carried out in different UN regions. Secondly, to seek innovative solutions. And thirdly, to coordination and cooperation as appropriate with other bodies involved in e-waste activities. Talking about activities, there are different kind of activities going on right now. First of all, at the last COP in last May of this year, we had 2 of our technical guidelines that were adopted. It's the guideline on environmentally sound refurbishment and repair of used computing equipment, and the second is the environmentally sound recycling and material recovery of end-of-life computing equipment. In parallel of that, we have 2 pilot projects that just started on used and end-of-life computing equipment, one in Jordan and one in Serbia that will start very soon. But we have also several awareness-raising activities through workshops in different regions, and also through webinars like we are attending today. The PACE documents, and I would say this will be the main output of PACE, it will be the guidance documents on environmentally sound management of used and end-of-life computing equipment, and it will be a summary of the recommendation of the different technical guidelines that were developed under PACE during the several years. And namely, it is the two guidelines that I already mentioned to you, but we can also talk about the report on environmentally sound management criteria recommendation, the glossary of terms, for example. I thank you for your attention, and I invite you to go on our website where you can find all the relevant information. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. We're now going to continue with Karen Pollard's presentation. Karen, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Hi, my name is Karen Pollard. I work for the United States Environmental Protection Agency as a domestic electronics recycler expert. So I know mostly about what's happening within the United States. So that's how I've addressed this presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm hoping everybody can hear me fine.
We can, yes.
Excellent. Okay, so today I'd like to talk to you about a number of things. One, I want to talk to you about the importance of reuse and recycling of electronics in the U.S., why we think it's important, some background information about electronic recycling in general in the U.S. I want to talk to you about what we're doing, what our strategy, our national strategy we have for electronic stewardship in the U.S., and then a little bit about some collection programs that we have in the U.S., kind of what they look like, and some emerging issues and some existing challenges that we face. Perhaps some of you face the same. So as you know, electronics are very complex devices that are constantly changing in both design and what they're made up of. Those devices contain materials such as steel, plastic, glass, ceramics, copper, aluminum, lead, mercury, beryllium, gold, silver. It's just a lot of different materials. Each of those different components have different potential for reuse and recycling, or recovery, actually. Some of the electronics also have components that could present a risk to either human health or the environment, or both. So, for instance, cathode ray tubes have, the CRT tubes have about 2 to 5 pounds of lead in them. The backlighting for the flat screens that people are seeing these days have mercury in the lamp. Some of those backlightings, some of them are done with LEDs, but some have mercury in those lamps. Some of the circuit boards may contain leaded solder. Currently it's going to non-leaded solders, but there's still certainly, since we're talking about the legacy materials, many of the circuit boards still have lead in the solder. And then plastics, if it's burned, could produce dioxin and furans. So it's certainly important to make sure that electronics are recycled in a proper way. All right, so some of the benefits that we see for reuse and recycling is that reusing and recycling old electronics not only avoids landfilling the materials, which is certainly a waste of all of those materials that we just talked about were in there, but it conserves our natural resources as gold, silver, palladium by avoiding having to mine or dig or process those raw materials as they're coming out of the ground. You can see here there's how much of, if you took ton of cell phones. On average, that ton of cell phones would have 140 kilograms of copper, 300 grams of gold, 3 grams of platinum. You see the list right here. An example, if you can kind of try to compare mining for these materials versus just recycling electronics that are considered waste, you take 1 metric ton of circuit boards that can out of like cell phones and electronics, that contains about 440 to 800 times the amount of gold and 30 to 40 times the amount of copper mined from 1 ton of ore in the United States. So you can see that's quite a benefit in recycling the material versus having to dig the raw material. Okay, some other benefits. Avoids pollution, especially when you compare it to mining for the raw material. It uses less energy to recycle these materials versus actually mining it. So a lot of our benefits are compared to actually mining for the raw materials. And of course, a robust and recycling industry can create green jobs and lead to more productive use of valuable materials. All right, so a little bit about what's happening in the United States. The U.S. consumer just loves electronics. They are projected to spend $202.6 billion on electronics for this year, so 2013. In 2012, the average U.S. household owned 24 electronic products. So they all had some cell phones, they all had TVs, they all had some gaming systems. So that's kind of all that added up equals 24 these days. The U.S. government is the largest consumer of IT goods and services, and it spent $82 billion in 2012. Now, when I say goods and services, not all of that is for recycling, obviously, but that is also buying the equipment and keeping the equipment maintained. Currently, the national reuse and recycling rate is about 25% on average, with 75% going to a landfill. Actually, since we're talking PACE, you're talking computers, and our computer recycling and reuse rate is much higher. It is at it's closer to 40%. But then we have cell phones, which are really, really bad recycling rate, I think, because they're so small, easier to store. Okay, what we have in the United States is, as our domestic legal framework, it includes e-waste is subject to the RCRA requirements, which is waste identification and proper management based on how it is characterized, whether it's characterized by hazardous waste or not. We have a specific cathode ray tube, or CRT, regulation and a spent lead acid battery regulation. Both of those have specific export requirements. And then 25 different states have some sort of electronics take-back law, with 15 of those states having some sort of landfill ban. We also have some private standards that are very strong. Electronic Product Environmental Assessment Tool, or the EPEAT system, which we're not going to get too far into today. We also have 2 existing electronic recycling certification programs so that we know how the recyclers are handling the material. Okay, with all of that, in 11 in November of 2010, the President established a government interagency task force because they wanted a coordinated effort in order for us to improve safe handling and disposal of used electronics throughout the product's life cycle. My agency, the EPA, as well as the Council for Environmental Quality and the General Services Administration both led that effort. A little bit about the General Services Administration. That is our agency that manages all of our whatever the federal government owns, which includes electronics. So in July of 2011, we launched the National Strategy for Electronic Stewardship, and in that document, we have 4 overarching goals on how we're going to manage our electronics. The first is, and it goes over the life cycle, so you'll see that as you hear about the different goals. The first goal is to promote the development and more efficient and sustainable electronic products. So that deals with research, that deals with designing greener electronics. The second goal is to direct federal agencies to buy, use, reuse, and recycle their electronics responsibly. The third goal is to support recycling options and systems for the American consumer. That's a very domestic, trying to get the word out to all of the U.S. consumers, and strengthen America's role in international electronic stewardship. So somebody's bleeding through. If they can mute their mic, that would be great. Thank you. So the national strategy creates incentives to better protect human health and the environment, to conserve valuable resources, to save money, and to create jobs. And you can follow this link in order to see all of the different things that were discussed in the national strategy. And as I said, the national strategy focused on stewardship of electronics throughout its life cycle. So it covered points that were with design and manufacture throughout its use, and eventual reuse, recycling, and recovery, and disposal. All right. One of the real strong things about using a national approach was that the national strategy not only talked to what EPA could do, which was from an environmental standpoint, but it talked about what the General Services Administration could do, which, as I said, is the agency that manages our federal equipment, what our OSHA, which is our Occupational Safety and Health Administration, could do, and it talked about what our trade people could do, as well as even our Postal Service got into the act and did a program as well. So here's some examples of the NSCS work. I'm just going to leave that for you to look at. I'm going to move forward because I know we don't have a whole bunch of time. So I found that the benefits with using doing a national strategy was really strong. Using this interagency approach, it elevated the importance of priority of proper electronics management for all of the federal government. It facilitated fast and easy communication about electronics management throughout the federal government. I don't know about you guys, but it's very difficult for me sitting in EPA to talk to somebody over in say, GSA or OSHA, all these different federal agencies, But this way, we had connections over there, and we are able to talk much easier and communicate with each other easier. It encouraged for other federal agencies to help develop needed information guidance or programs, which is really strong. It used to be, electronics used to be an EPA type of thing, and now it's a full federal agency, federal government type of concern. So actually having a program, the national strategy, provided a coordinated and public blueprint of actions that we will be accomplishing, provided electronic stakeholders with a better understanding of the importance of the federal government places on electronic stewardship. It assists electronics recyclers in realizing the importance of becoming certified to the electronic stewardship standard, and it demonstrated a commitment of improving U.S. stewardships both domestically and internationally. Okay, a little bit about collection programs. I wanted to tell you what we are doing with regard to collection programs, even though I can say that we don't have the best recycling rate available. So 25 of our 50 states have collection, some sort of a take-back program that deals with collections. But there is no national take-back mandate. The state laws are mostly extended producer responsibility models. Consumers and households are usually eligible for free recycling. 15 state laws also include landfill disposal bans, and the laws differ from state to state, presenting a challenge for many of the manufacturers we have. SMM Electronics, we have a program here for that the federal government has, which it is called the SMM Electronics Challenge. And it has some of our major manufacturers providing voluntary take-back options for consumers throughout the United States. So, and other collection programs, we have local municipalities, manufacturers, retailers, recyclers. Many of them throughout the United States have daily programs that people can drop off electronics, or they hold special collection events throughout the year. The government also has collection programs as well. So GSA, or Government Services Administration, that manages all the federal government equipment, it has established a comprehensive government-wide policy on used equipment that maximizes reuse, clears data, and ensures that all federal electronics are processed by certified recyclers. We're going to talk a little bit about certified recyclers in a moment. And that policy is being codified into a federal regulation for federal agencies, okay? So what GSA is doing is telling all the federal agencies, you must manage your property this way. We also have some voluntary programs, which the EPA has a challenge that assists federal agencies in managing used electronics. And it goes further than just how to dispose of the material. So that's the difference on where the Federal Green Challenge is. And our post office has a program called Blue Earth, and they collect and transport unwanted electronics from federal agencies and their employees free of charge, and transfers that electronics to a certified recycler. And we have found so far that this program is especially valuable for federal facilities located in rural areas by providing the easy transportation and free transportation. All right, a little bit about certified recyclers and refurbishers. It's basically the certification programs are based on different standards. They're recycling standards, specific standards for electronic facilities or recyclers. And they have to, those facilities, recycling facilities, have to demonstrate to an accredited independent third-party auditor that they meet those specific standards to ensure responsible recycling of electronics management. There's two programs available right now in the United States, the Responsible Recycling Practices, or the R2, and the eStewards program. Each of those programs are run by third parties, not the federal government. These programs help ensure responsible recycling of used electronics. They advance best management practices, and they assess environmental, worker health, and security practices of the recycling facilities. It does go as far as data security as well, to clear the data and purge them. There has been a dramatic increase in refurbishers and recyclers becoming certified, and I actually have an updated number here. This first bullet, it says between July 2011, that's when the national strategy was rolled out, and today there are now over 500 electronic recyclers that have been certified to one of the programs, and from those two dates, July 2011 and today, there has been an increase of 324% of electronic recyclers that have become certified. It's not just in the U.S. either. There are certified recyclers in 12 different countries, including the U.S. So we have those in Canada, United Kingdom, Mexico, China, India, Singapore, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Costa Rica, and I believe there's a few others on getting certified now in other countries. If you want to, here's a website that you can go to and see where all the certified recyclers are. And we currently are working on a implementation study where we are evaluating whether the certification programs are being implemented in a transparent and consistent way, and that they're achieving the desired results. So basically, we're going and looking and seeing how they're being audited to, the facilities are being audited, and see if there's any improvements or really what some of the strengths are of these programs. So here's just in one simple slide visual of the materials life cycle. So let me jump into some of the emerging and existing challenges right now. And what I did is I tried to kind of put those challenges within that life cycle of the electronics. Okay? So the first one is resource extraction. Electronics are being made using an increasing number of materials and elements. In 1980s, electronics were made with about 12 elements in them from the periodic table. Today, they're made with about 60 elements. So what we're seeing as a challenge is the extraction of raw materials is energy intensive and potentially degrading to the environment. So if we're having to dig or mine for 60 different elements, you can see that the increase in the energy and pollution actually in the mining has increased significantly. But if you look at the recovery end of it, you see that only somewhere between 16 and 20 of these elements can actually be recovered through recycling today. So you can see that if we're digging more and only recovering a small amount, we're still having to dig a heck of a lot of these elements. So that's certainly a big challenge that we have. Under product design and material processing, we talked about electronics are constantly changing and evolving. What that results in is recyclers don't often know what elements are used to manufacture electronics, making it difficult to determine the proper management in scenarios at the end of life. It's also difficult in product design to make material substitutions without knowledge of unintentional consequences. So, for instance, you might be wanting to get rid of a toxic chemical, but your substitute, what can work as a substitution, may not always be adequately characterized. So you might not know if it's a toxic material for a toxic material or a toxic material for a benign material. More information is necessary to understand how electronics can be designed More information is also necessary to understand how electronics can be designed to be used longer, be repaired easier, and upgraded easier so that we don't have to consistently replace our electronics, maybe dismantled safely, particularly as electronics evolve over time. So we might, by the time we figure out how to break down or upgrade older equipment, we're now on to newer models and have to go through that again. Okay, for collection and processing, as I said in this presentation, we have a number of different collection and reuse and recycling programs, yet only about 25% on average of electronics are being collected for recycling. So some of the challenges that we see is not only increasing the amount and quality, the amount of electronics being collected for reuse or recycling, but also accurately measuring those amounts. Ensuring that collected materials are managed by responsible refurbishers and recyclers is always important to us. And increasing the outreach to consumers. It's very difficult for us to get to all of the people of the United States in order to get them to know what to do, that electronic recycling is important, and how to do it in a way that we can ensure that it will be done safely. Okay, and of course, this processing challenges. Once that material's been collected, we need to know what to do with our CRT glass. The CRT glass markets are declining. New markets need to be developed, or new legal uses need to be found. We need to continue to increase the number of certified recyclers and refurbishers while ensuring the certification programs are sufficiently protective. So while we've seen this huge increase, we still have we have not hit quite half of our electronic recyclers. So we still have a little ways to go to get 100% certified recyclers. And as you see, we are going into facilities to try to see if these programs are being done in a sound way. And then better data is needed on materials exported to other countries versus processed in the U.S. And we actually just released yesterday a new study on what materials we believe are leaving our borders. Okay, so our major conclusion that I just wanted to say is material scarcity. We need to ensure, if we all like these electronics, and let's face it, they're not going away, and I personally like all the electronics, but we need to ensure that materials needed to manufacture those new technologies will be available to meet consumer and technology demands in, say, 5, 10, or 20 years, because we don't know. I personally don't know where this is going, but I want to make sure that there's materials that are available so that we can meet those demands. Okay, and then while the national strategy is there, it's only part of the solution. Despite that, all the progress we have made, work will remain, and we need to continue to do work if we're to ensure that the electronics industry is going to stay strong, vibrant, and sustainable in the years to come. And I think that's all I have to say. Yeah, here's some different contact information. The first one is me, and then Rick Picardi deals with international work. Bob Hess is our U.S. Competence Authority under Basel, and Kim Cochran is our State Department representative. So.
You have now control of your presentation. Please go ahead.
Okay, and you can hear me clearly, just to confirm.
Perfectly, yes.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, good morning and afternoon and whatever. Here it's morning. My name is Patty Whiting, and I have been with Sims Recycling Solutions for a little over a year and a half. And prior to that, the U.S. EPA with Karen for over 2 decades. And towards the end of my tenure, I was the U.S. Competent Authority for Basel. And more, I had electronics in my portfolio, which was interesting because I started out my career in mining waste at EPA. So just was sort of going from virgin mining to urban mining. Anyway, let's just go on to the next slide. I have to, of course, talk a little bit about my company, just briefly. But we're the largest metals recycler, and as the third slide that I'll get to will demonstrate, we have a global presence. We have 260 sites in 5 continents, and we do electronics recycling, municipal recycling, toner cartridges, and plastic recycling. And for the past 5 years, we've been on the Corporate Knights Global 100 Most Sustainable Corporations list, and I'm just going to gloss, but that's what they look at on the next slide when they do this selection. And I'm going to gloss over a lot of these because you're going to have copies of them that you can download. And I would, as I go into this presentation, stress that I'm giving this presentation from the view of the challenges on a business angle that we encounter in terms of, opening up facilities in different parts of the world. And in terms of the more technical questions, I will follow up in terms of talking to the engineers and, to give you like very in-depth detail when we follow up, Karen and I, with the written Q&As, the answers. So moving on to the contents. So in terms of my presentation, I have a lot of background info, and I think that's out of habit because I worked at EPA for so long that I do start with the environmental end, which Karen so ably, covered. Really, the focus on my presentation is going to be the challenges that we see in terms of investing, again, in developing countries and putting facilities there, sort of the economic factors that we look at and consider when making our business plans to invest. Okay, and moving on. Okay, so, all right. First of all, again, we all know that electronics are non-traditional waste streams. They're not, for example, a 55-gallon drum of printing sludge. And as Karen had noted, they're complex devices. They consist of a wide variety of materials. But economically, and I think she also stressed, because I think the U.S. government does understand that they offer so much potential in terms of recycling precious, critical, and scarce metals and providing green jobs. It's so much better energy-wise, of course, to recycle versus, the energy used in virgin mining. And my next slide, the thing I'm going to get into this later, to take away from this slide is that the big challenge now is just downstream, like for us, as a company. And I think even for the government, for everybody that's looking at electronics, sort of finding out where they're going and hopefully that they are being managed in an environmentally sound manner. And once again, Karen stressed this, the importance of proper management, but I would just say, again, the importance of it in terms of protecting human health and the environment in general, as well as worker safety, but also, again, the better the management processes, the more opportunity to realize the economic and social benefits of reuse and recycling. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about the PACE guidelines, but I'm only going to touch upon them because Patrick also mentioned them. But I wanted to note that I think in my professional tenure that this has probably been one of the best things that I've worked on because, I mean, the work products themselves benefit from such a diverse membership of experts from all paradigms, all different, stakeholders, all different aptitudes. And I think that it really benefits that the products come out and they look at all angles, the balance, I guess you would say, in terms of the environment and, concerns about that are expressed by the various stakeholders, whether it's an NGO or it's an academic or it's, an international organization or, for me, the private sector. And it's been interesting, that I've actually was involved in this group both as a representative of the U.S. government and now from the private sector, and I benefit immensely from both paradigms I have. So I just wanted to stress that. And of course, I'm not going to go over. You can read the guidelines, but if you can just look at, this is an example of the recycling guideline, but also the one on reuse is very informative, and it's just something that hopefully everybody has access to through obviously the website for the Basel Convention. Okay. And if you could bear with me, because it's challenging for me. I've got my notes on one side, I've got my screen up, but okay, let's move on. Okay. So in terms of just a little angle from the private perspective, again, we think that they're a major achievement, but the guidelines themselves, like anything, isn't going to solve the problems with regards to e-waste. And, I mean, some things that we recognized and before in my public life as a public sector negotiating different things, we've realized that, they were developed by experts, these guidelines, and to some extent in developed countries, bridges are necessary in terms of like looking at the level that a country's at, and at this time we're kind of looking at like interim guidelines, that address the different aspects or where countries are. And I also wanted to note, like Karen did, that electronics recycler certification programs that develop and document and fully implement on a holistic level, the concerns regarding the environment are so useful to supplement the guidelines as well as national and international guidance or legislation. And SIMS, of course, like most companies, we are, R2, and we're working to be e-Steward certified because it's a market mechanism. Our customers want this, and they want to know that we, that we're doing the best we can to meet these benchmarks. So it's a good mechanism for us in terms of our PR in the market. But the biggest thing I wanted to say here is, as a company representative, that although we have standard programs in place for training, et cetera, and you can look at our website, and of course, I think, Corey's TESAM, we as a company, you do the best, but you can't control all parameters. And I think a big thing that, people just don't always follow the rules. And even if the rules are followed, accidents do happen, which is why, we always strive for continuous improvement. And, you may strive for perfection, but there's always the human element. And a big thing is when the market goes down, as currently it is now, the metals market, the impact goes downstream. And, we do diligence, but if someone decides not to play by the rules or to cut corners, they can do it. And that's partly the biggest challenge that we have right now is like really getting down to the downstream. And, on that note, of course, enforcement and good governance are key if you're looking into a developing country. So on to the next slide. So this just gets into, the business angle. So if we're going to go into a developing country, or even in the U.S., if you're looking to put a facility, there are certain factors that we consider, including collection and transportation and conversion, which is a term of art, for recovery, and output streams, and then the third-party reimbursement, whether it's to a government or a manufacturer, depending on the way a law is structured. And each of these factors has costs and or revenues associated with them. And then there's just a little thing here, a slide that kind of demonstrates it. And so basically, like I noted, there's costs associated with all of these except for our output streams, but there's also some costs associated with that as well. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. And the only factor that we really have control over is the conversion or the recovery stage in terms of these factors. So moving on to collection, of course, it's the most important step in the process because that's our supply stream. And without a robust collection system and ensuring sufficient volume, the whole thing breaks down. So one thing you look at when you go to a country, I mean, you can't just have a trickle. You've got to know that you've got, a consistent stream, and that goes into a lot of variables, which I'll get to as I go down, go into this more. Again, it's difficult to estimate because of the small number of devices from so many diverse consumers in terms of us when we go in, like figuring what our supply stream will be. And it's a cost because, and we have little influence over it because, as more recyclers enter the marketplace, there's more demand for collectors, and the price goes up with that. And then transportation, that's a big thing, getting material collected from the different places to the facility. And of course, available infrastructure is key here, the roads, the ports. Of course, it's a big challenge in developing countries depending on the level of the infrastructure. And I had noted before, an interesting thing is in the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is something that it's kind of a quasi, it's a government organization. It was developed under the Bush-Cheney administration. And they go into countries to promote private investment. They do partnerships, basically. And they did a compact with El Salvador, which is working on, for example, logistics in terms of like making a logistics hub, working on like making the roads go from, one end of the country to the other, to the airports, to the ports. And of course, factors like this, they make it's an incentive for investment. Although there's other, like I said, there's other things. There has to be a supply stream. There has to be laws in place. But again, we don't have any control over these factors. It's basically set by the marketplace, transportation, and the cost of fuel, which is influenced by worldwide events. So that's just another factor. And then we get to the one step that we do have, not complete, but we do have control over the recovery phase, of course. The one thing, though, we can't really dictate. We take what the market gives us. We'd love to have the resource-rich materials, but we take what the marketplace provides us. And, of course, we have the ability to control the cost through improvements in process, efficiency and streamlining, the use of technology and through training. So we try to find the most economical ways to process material. Of course, we have no control over the labor rates. That's dictated by national law. And in some instances, because we're not a Basel party, it would be less expensive for us to ship material to the U.S. for final processing, but we can't due to us being a non-party. It's prohibited. And I guess I can talk more freely now that I'm with the U.S., not with the U.S. government anymore, but it was always so frustrating for me as a competent authority because a lot of times, for example, we're so close, geographically to South America and Central America. But because we can have Article 11 agreements, so the U.S. has an agreement with Mexico. They send material there to be recovered, but not for disposal. But it can come to the U.S. for anything, and the same thing with Canada. And we've got the multilateral with OECD, that's developed countries, and then import-only agreements that we do have with Malaysia, Costa Rica, and the Philippines. But outside of that, they put a moratorium, the government, on doing, such agreements because it would undermine us becoming a party to the Basel Convention. So I'd always get these calls, from different countries in South and Central America looking to send waste because we have such technical capacity but we can't. The U.S. cannot receive that. So from all angles, it just does not make sense to me, both environmentally and economically. But it's just that's the way it is. Hopefully, at some point, the U.S. will become a party. Getting on to the output streams. This is an important factor, of course. The commodities that produced during the conversion have both positive and negative values. Steel, plastic, and precious metals are in demand, and we have readily available markets for these materials. Of course, prices fluctuate with the market, and with metals, of course, the market is definitely down. And other materials cost money to further process or dispose, and this includes batteries. We do have a specialized battery processor, fluids, and CRT glass. And again, getting to the CRT glass, that's just such an issue for us in the U.S. because there's not a lot of, we can't, it's harder to ship it. And I believe that CRT glass, it's pretty much stabilized when you look at the material in it. But there's a cost if you have to ship it as hazardous. And then you ship it, there's not a lot of, there's a few secondary, there's the smelters. There's a couple in Canada. There's one in Mexico. But there's not a lot of options. I think we used to send it to furnaces. This is when I was in the government. I knew this in Malaysia. But they stopped consenting to receiving this material. It was used as flux, which basically is like sand in the process. So now there's a lot of CRT glass. And when, again, we look at different people in the U.S. that recycle, and we're often amazed at the prices that we hear that are quoted because we just don't really understand what they can be doing with it in an environmentally sound manner. And what has happened, I think the truth has kind of come out because now, they're finding more and more warehouses just filled with glass, and there's been, instances of dumping. So that's a big challenge for us right now. But again, if you talk to Switzerland, my colleague in the Basel Convention, Marco Belletti, said that it's no longer a problem for them, but it's definitely a problem in the U.S. That's something that we grapple with. So some of the things that have to be disposed of our output streams, packaging, particle board cabinets due to the glue, slag from various smelter operations, and potentially there's final disposal associated with battery processing. And in terms of packaging, we can find markets for shrink wrap at foam. There's very few packaging materials that we can't find a home for, but the problem is glue. When foam is glued to cardboard, that's it. You can't really do much with it. And that underscores the importance of laws that encourage a relationship between the recycler and the manufacturers, because in this instance, we've been able to talk to the manufacturers and ask them not to use glue, not to, glue things because it makes it more difficult for us. And there are changes that are happening now. But I'm told by, the people that I work with that by weight, pretty much mostly everything is recyclable except 2% in terms of packaging. And the final piece of the puzzle is, and I'm sorry, I thought I fixed my presentation, but I think I made it worse. But this is just a crazy slide. But the manufacturers, the governments, are the source of our reimbursement, and that depends, of course, on the laws in the U.S. They vary from state to state. And as much as we'd like to be paid a certain amount for our services, if a government sets a certain price through the law, we're going to pay that. And also, similarly, if a recycler demands that we, like, for example, if we ask Dell or somebody to pay a certain amount, well, another recycler is willing to provide the same service at 10% less, the manufacturer is most likely going to go with them. And then again, you just, it's the market, but that's where there's a potential for corners to be cut. And I'm not saying where, it's I'm not making a value statement on that. I'm just saying that's the way it is. And, again, we can either provide it or not. We can drop our price or we can just not go with them depending, in terms of how we're paid. And so I guess in concluding, we all know that it's a non-traditional, stream, and it requires a mixture of approaches to mitigate it, and it's on all levels. It's from, it's corporate, responsibility on our end. It's laws and regulations. It's good governance. I mean, it's a whole, there's just so many which is why I love e-waste. There's just so many parameters. I mean, you've got the social, economic, environmental. It's just such a multidisciplinary, topic. And of course, the guidelines are a very important step in promoting environmentally sound practices. But again, like I said, it's not, the guidelines alone aren't going to they're not going to solve all the problems. And there's, all the things that I noted. I didn't even get into regulations. It's the U.S. and the EU. That's why the countries like, South America, I think they're actually working hard to harmonize, because it's compliance is such a nightmare when you're going from state to state, and, in the EU similarly with just different, regulations. Although they're getting their act together better than the U.S. is, frankly. And then, as I noted, despite having every bell and whistle in place in terms of environmental worker standards, there's always the unknown element presented by people and markets, especially when you go downstream. And as I said, that we evaluate a number of economic factors when we make decisions, and except for conversion or recovery costs, many of these factors are out of our control. And so I just wanted to say thank you, and that's my contact information. And I guess that concludes my presentation.